Okay, so here we are in the second half of chapter, you see it here, we're second half of chapter 23, and we're going to look at the importance of international trade. So this is here, guys, on page 266, part B of chapter 23. So again, the way they phrase it is like outlining the significance of international trade for Ireland's economy. They can phrase this in plenty of different ways. They might say, outline reasons why it's important for the Irish government to engage in international trade, or they might say, it's like, what are the benefits of trade? And you just need to make sure you've got these points chipped off, okay? So again, the first thing there is this is fairly straightforward. It's a chance for countries to increase their sales and profits. Very simple thing, guys. Our economy is very small, but when we export, there's only 5 million people in Ireland. When we export across the world, you've got billions of customers you can potentially sell to, okay? So change that even there to Ireland is 6 million now. So that's fine. Then you also have, guys, economies of scale. Now this is very important, but as Irish companies start to mass produce, their average cost of production will start to fall. They'll get benefits from for buying their raw materials in bulk. Their workers will specialise, they'll get more efficient. So again, when companies start to produce more from exporting into foreign countries, they'll start to benefit from economies of scale. And that will enable those companies to sell their goods at a lower price. And the key thing there, guys, that is going to reduce the inflation level. So it's a bit of a trickier one to explain, but remember, when businesses mass produce goods, it's cheaper to make each good, and then that helps. Then they can sell the goods at a lower price, and that helps lower the rate of inflation. Okay, so that's the first thing there. Next thing then is just increase employment. Massive point you'll notice already, probably about all the big American companies that have set up here. They've all set up here because they're using Ireland as a stepping stone to accessing the EU. So it's very important that Ireland has an open economy, an economy that engages in international trade, because if we have a closed economy, those American companies won't come here. And the massive benefit for our economy is they directly employ 250,000 people in Ireland. So make sure you've got that figure marked in. The multinationals directly employ 250,000 people in this country. Other simple things is just low prices, okay? So foreign imports coming into Ireland, even foreign companies setting up in Ireland, they sell their goods at a lower price, and that drives down the inflation rate, okay? It helps reduce prices again in Ireland. Last thing then is just there's bigger choice for consumers. The more goods you start to import from foreign countries, the better choice Irish consumers have. So there overall, that's the benefits of international trade, the arguments for Ireland's economy. But we'll go into this in a little bit more detail now. This is the key stuff, okay? This question, being honest, they'd have been asking this back maybe 15 years ago. They're not leaning into that much now, the significance of international trade. Still, obviously, make sure you have a good grasp on it. I always just circle back to the E's. It's employment, economies of scale, and that's fairly straightforward there. But what I'd be very keen for you guys to sit down is to nail these definitions on free trade, protectionism, international trade. All of these things are crucial, right? So again, the first thing there is free trade. This is when countries can buy and sell products with other countries and without any barriers or restrictions placed in that way. Now the restrictions, guys, so the barriers could be stuff like, barriers could be like taxes, but it could also be excessive paperwork, okay? And that can slow down trade as well if you have to fill in a lot of forms. So remember again, that's free trade, where there's trade with other countries without any paperwork and without any taxes. And a great one to remember is there's free trade within the EU. All right, so that's very important. Ireland's a member of the EU, 27 countries in the EU, there's free trade there. The richest trading bloc in the world is the EU. Make sure you're writing these things down, make sure you've got these points built into your answer. The next one then, guys, is protectionism. Now, you should zone in on this especially, guys, because all of this stuff on international trade all pops up in the Leaving Cert Economics paper. So if you're not doing Leaving Cert Economics and you're aiming for H1, again, you need to lean in here, because the other people, about a quarter of the students who do business also do economics, and they've got a massive advantage on you here. So I've noticed it. I'm just giving you feedback from what I see in class. Some students would nail this because they've already done it in economics, and they know they've doubled the chances of seeing it in their Leaving Cert. So people who do business economics focus on this hugely. So just make sure you've got this clued in. And also, if you are doing economics, chance you'll see all this stuff in the paper as well. So make sure you just nail all of this stuff no matter what. Now, so we'll go into it. Now, what you want to note is, even just look at the word protectionism, right? Now, the word protectionism, what I always like to stress with students is that, look at this, you're trying to protect jobs in your country. And the argument against international trade, it's a weak one, I know, but it's still an argument. You say, right, when you start to import goods from foreign countries, those goods are coming in at a cheaper price and they're making the Irish businesses go bankrupt. All right, that's the argument against international trade. So again, the simple thing like, let's say there's an Irish t-shirt manufacturer, and that t-shirt manufacturer is put out of business because all of the cheap imports coming in from China, the t-shirts are a tenth of the price, right? And the argument against trade is we could say, look, stop importing these t-shirts from China because Irish companies cannot compete with these cheap imports, all right? That's the idea behind protectionism. But look at the word, guys, it's protect. What are they trying to protect? They're trying to protect jobs, and they're trying to protect smaller indigenous companies. And how do they argue that you do that? You do that by stopping foreign imports coming into the country. Protectionism is the exact opposite to free trade. Just drill that into your head. Free trade, open economies, they engage in loads of trades, no barriers. Protectionism, the other side. You close off your economy from the rest of the world to protect indigenous businesses and to protect jobs. And that's all it is. But they're not going to call it anti-trade, okay? So they'll have the word protect in it because the argument there is to protect jobs. And that's what you need to remember, right? So anyway, countries try to do that, stop foreign imports coming into their country by implementing barriers to trade. Really, really important that you know that word, because they might even say later on, they might say outline the different methods of protectionism that a country can use. And you have to be like, oh yeah, protectionism is barriers to trade. That's what they want you to spot. Right, and we'll get into the barriers to trade now. You can see them on the same page. Open economy, this is an economy that engages in free trade with the rest of the world. There's no barriers. Ireland has got one of the most open economies in the world. All right, so it's a very, very easy thing to note there. So open economy is an economy that engages in trade with the rest of the world, right? Closed economy is the opposite, okay? North Korea, closed economy. Now, next thing then is deregulation. And what you're doing here is deregulation is when you remove the legal barriers to entering into an industry, okay? So you open up the market. That's when they say to deregulate a market is essentially means that you increase the competition in the market. Right, that's what they want you to note. Just maybe a great example of this is they deregulated the taxi industry. So they allowed more people to buy taxi licenses and that increased the supply of taxis in Ireland, right? But that's the idea behind deregulation, is when you remove the barriers to entering an industry, okay? And we'll see that happening now, that the EU will be doing it. They'll be trying to deregulate markets to bring more competition into economies, okay? And the big thing you always need to stress there is deregulation will just create more competition and leads to lower prices. All right, so that's what they mean when they say to deregulate a market, you remove the barriers to entering an industry. Sometimes countries may deregulate a market if they give more licenses. So like the Irish government will give out more licenses for TV stations, like TV3, that's deregulating the market, okay? When they introduce more licenses to provide a particular good or service. That's what they want you to note there. Brilliant. So is everyone with me on this there? Make sure you've got that there. It's the elimination of government power in an industry. Okay, that's what they want you to have there. Remember the taxi licenses? That was the government's power. The government would have the power to give you licenses to get a taxi. They gave out more licenses, they deregulate the market. They reduced their influence on the industry. Make sure you've got these things marked in, okay? They've asked deregulation a couple of times in the Leaving Cert and students are just lost in it, okay? So always circle back. The removal of barriers to entering an industry and it creates competition. Like if you were able to look back at that definition, I know I'm harping on a bit about this, but if you're even in the exam and you just said this, removing barriers to entering an industry, and then you circle back onto the idea that deregulation creates more competition and that just creates lower prices, you'd have been streets ahead of most students doing that question. All right, so don't overthink it. Deregulation, more competition, lower prices because the government removed the barriers to entering that industry. Brilliant. Now the next thing, these are the barriers to international trade. So you've got QSET, okay? So first thing there is just quotas, subsidies, embargoes and tariffs, all right? Now again, this is one of these things that like, if you're literally looking at quota, the word limit, subsidy, it's a price support, okay? Financial support. Embargo, a ban, and a tariff, literally just a tax, okay? So one of these things that like, when the examiner is correcting these definitions in the exam, you won't get any marks if you leave out these keywords. So quota, guys, is literally just a limit that the government can put on foreign imports entering into a country, right? So imagine just a hypothetical scenario here, but imagine if it was France and everybody was buying Japanese cars. So the French government turn around and say like, right, we need to support Renault, they're a French car manufacturer. So the Japanese government say like, right, let's stop the amount of people who are buying the Toyota cars. So the French government turn around and they just put a quota and they say, look, there's a limit of 10,000 Japanese cars imported every year. What happens then is when the 10,000 cars are bought up, and let's say the demand is for 30,000, well, the remaining demand then will go on the French cars. So that's all you're doing when you implement a quota. You restrict the supply of a foreign import entering into the country. Why would you do such a thing? Because then the citizens of that country are forced to buy goods of the indigenous business. That's all it is. You don't necessarily completely ban it, you just put a limit on the amount of foreign imports entering the country to encourage your citizens to buy off the indigenous companies, the homegrown, the domestic firms. And that's literally it, okay? So again, you see the word there popping up there, limit is the main one there. Put a limit on the amount of goods being exported. Again, no further imports will be allowed. And then the last thing there, which is a key objective of a quota, the consumers then have no option but to just then buy off the indigenous companies. That's they want you to note when you're talking about a quota. Next one then, guys, is subsidy. This is a financial support given to domestic industry to reduce their production costs, and that is the key thing there. So a simple thing, imagine if it's Renault and Toyota and both their cars are being sold for €20,000. The French government could turn around and say, you know what, we'll give Renault a subsidy of €3,000 for every car they make. Now the Renault car is cheaper than the Toyota car. The Toyota car, again, the idea here is that the French people will now buy the Toyota car. So all it is there is a subsidy. It's a price support that governments will give to, an indigenous business, a domestic business, to help them reduce their selling price. Again, they'll just be cheaper compared to the foreign imports, and that's what they're trying to do. Remember, again, these are barriers to trade. Just write this down and mark this in. When they're talking about barriers to trade, they're basically saying, how do you stop imports coming into a country? That's what countries want to do. Like, so again, how do they do that? They just make their own goods cheaper, right? That's a subsidy. Again, make sure, I thought this was an amazing question and it caught out loads of students, is that one year I saw it in a mock paper, it was distinguished between a subsidy and a grant, okay? Both is money that the government will give to domestic businesses to support them. But subsidy, guys, is a price support, helping you to reduce your production costs to enable you to sell the good at a lower price. A grant is a lump sum payment that governments give to a domestic business when they're starting out to help them buy something expensive like a building. All right, they're both very, very similar. Both times the government are giving money to a domestic business, but a subsidy is to help them sell their goods at a lower price to make them more competitive. But a grant is a lump sum payment that you'll get off the government, and it's usually to help you buy a building or buy expensive machinery. It's like a thing that they'll give you to help you start out. All right, so make sure you've got the difference between the two of them there. Okay, so guys, just circle in there, guys. A grant is not a barrier to trade, so just remember that there. Okay, so mark that in there. The grant, it's not a trade barrier, but I just want to make sure people have that there as a difference there. Sorry about the handwriting; it's very messy there, but that's the idea behind it, right? Okay, embargo. This when you put a complete ban on foreign imports entering into the country. Again, people have no choice then just to buy off the indigenous business. So this might be a severe case, but a ban is just a ban on imports, again, forcing people to buy off indigenous companies. Again, the UK embargo is placed on imports from the UK to prevent the spread of the mad cow disease that happened in the 90s. So that's a trade embargo. Again, the US and Cuba. The US just had a trade embargo with Cuba and they banned any imports coming into the States from Cuba. And they also wouldn't trade with other countries who were. So that's why Cuba, we're set off from the rest of the world. That's what you have when you've got a trade embargo, right? Then you have a tariff, which is this is the most common form of a barrier to trade. This is just when you put a tax on the imports coming in. So let's imagine again, simple example of Toyota cars for 20 grand and the Renault cars for 20 grand. The French government might turn around and say, look, let's put a tax on the Toyota cars of €2,000 to make them more expensive. That way, if somebody does buy a Toyota car, at least the French government will get revenue from it. Okay, and that's just what you have there. One massive thing. Okay, so just make sure you're marking this down, that if they ask you to give an example of a tariff, don't say something like, if the Irish government put a tariff on oranges coming in from Spain, okay? Because think about it, both countries are in the EU and we cannot put trade barriers on countries inside of the EU. So be very, very careful about that. Don't give examples like that. You're better off just saying the United States and Japan or something like that. United States and China, if you're giving examples of it, all right? Make sure you mark that in. Just showing the examiner you're not aware of it. Tighter marking scheme, they can just refuse to accept it. So just make sure you've marked that down. That if you say, like an example of a tariff, don't use two countries between the EU, because countries within the EU have free trade. They cannot implement barriers to trade. All right, so make sure you've got that marked in. Okay, the other thing now we'll have a look at here is trading blocks, okay? So again, trading block is a group of countries that agree to trade freely with each other. Again, perfect example of the trading block is the EU, the richest and largest trading block, okay? There's free trade between all members, okay? So all 27 member states in the EU, there's trading blocks between them. Now, a question there they can ask you is like, what are the changing trends in the international economy and how does this impact on Irish businesses? Now, there's loads here. Please, please, please mark down there. Like, I'm going to go through this quite quickly. Two reasons for this. The marking scheme here is hugely open, and the second thing on this is you might have gotten different points already in class from your teacher on this, right? So the last time this was asked, they accepted 18 different points in the marking scheme. This is an incredibly open question, but it's still really badly answered, because students miss it. When this question pops up, it says, what are the changing trends in the international economy and how does this impact on Irish businesses? About half the students fail to explain how it impacts on Irish companies, and that's what you need to stress. So a simple thing there is like, I just have metric, like migration. There's an influx of workers emigrating from Eastern Europe into Ireland, okay? So how does this impact on Ireland's economy? Well, it's helping us address the labour shortages problem that we have. That's all it is, okay? So what are changing trends? And if you're on the ball with this, you don't even really need these notes here. Just circle back and use common sense. The war in Ukraine and Brexit, there's two simple things you can say straight away. War in Ukraine, price of raw materials going up, okay? Brexit, making it more difficult for Irish businesses to export into the UK. You've got two simple points there already, okay? Even you could circle back even into the inflation crisis, okay? Anything like that you can use there. Currency fluctuations, all right? So again, the euro strengthening in value. Remember, we looked at this already, but when the euro gets stronger, it's bad news for Irish exporters. So the euro strengthening in value, we will see a decrease. We'll see a decrease in the amount of exports that we have to other countries. So see the way I've written there, like the value of the sterling has decreased. That's basically saying like the euro has gotten stronger as well against it. So we are now exporting less into the UK as a result. Perfect. A simple one that's always going to be there, guys, is technology. Huge advancements in technology, and this enables Irish companies to advertise all over the world. Very, very straightforward there. Okay, and regulations. Okay, so regulations, there's more regulations as a result of Brexit. Okay, so again, it's harder now for Irish companies to import into the UK. There's more paperwork, even if you want to write that down beside it. If we want to export into the UK now, we have to deal with a lot more paperwork. That's another issue we're seeing. Inflation, as we mentioned already, okay, energy costs are shooting up. That's leading to wage demands, increased utility bills, another problem for Irish businesses. And then competition. We're seeing more competition coming in from lower wage economies like Czech Republic, Hungary, Slovakia, and this is a big challenge because they're able to provide agricultural products at a much cheaper price. All right. Now, guys, that's all on that. Now, remember again, they'll probably only look for 3 or 4 points if this does come up. So please just write down there beside it, war in Ukraine and Brexit, and an easy one as well, advancements in technology. It's making it easier for Irish companies to operate all over the world. Simple, keep it really, really simple on that, okay? And remember again, if this question pops up for 20 marks, play the marking scheme, give the examiner 5 points, okay? So I always circle back to metric. You know, you've got MET, RIC, migration, euro, technology, regulation, inflation, and more competition. But whatever way you want to do it, Brexit, all that sort of stuff, just use common sense. When it circles back there, what are the changing trends in international economy and how is that impacting Irish companies? Again, the only thing they're going to be strict on is the impact. You have to explain, is this a positive or negative effect and why? That's where they're going to catch you out. Okay, so remember, the examiner is going to be given a huge amount of freedom when they're correcting this, and they'll use their own judgment when they're accepting, oh, is this relevant? Is this a relevant change in the international economy? So just use that yourself. We can always use technology as well. Technology is always advancing, and that's one that you'll always see in the marking scheme there. All right, brilliant. Okay, what are the opportunities for Irish businesses in international trade? This is a bit of a weird question, right? Because when you see this, you have to look at it in two ways. It's basically like when they're saying opportunities, basically saying like, what are our strengths and what are the arguments in favour of us engaging in trade? So it's two things, guys. What are the advantages from trade and what are the arguments in favour of us engaging in trade? All right, that's the way we need to look at it. So first thing there is profit and sales. So again, big thing there is being a part of the EU enables Irish exporters to distribute their goods all across the EU without any trade barriers. And a great one to use there as well is the World Trade Organization are deregulating trade between countries, as in breaking down the barriers to trade, and this also is creating more opportunities for Irish businesses in trade. Always circle that down, guys. The role of the World Trade Organization is to deregulate markets, to open up markets, to allow more people to trade between those countries. All right, so that's all you have there, profits and sales. So basically what they're getting at with this question is, imagine you owned a business and why would you argue in favour? Let's say you own a company that makes tables, right? And what's the argument in favour of you selling your tables all over the world? First argument is, well, you're going to get to increase your profits, all right? That's the first thing, right? That's all there is to it. Second one then is, what is another strength that we have when we're engaging in trade? It's just our reputation, okay? So especially with agricultural exports, we've got a brilliant image that for having amazing beef, all that stuff, and that is an advantage we have in trade. So we can afford to sell our beef at a much higher price than other countries. So it's like if you're ever abroad, like you'll see ads like in some really fancy restaurants, they'll say stuff like Irish beef sold here. And that's an advertisement, okay? Because we've got a great reputation for our agricultural exports. Also, guys, our green image is amazing for tourists, and that is an example of an invisible export. Tourists coming over here, remember we looked at the first half of the chapter, tourists coming over here, buying Irish services, that's an invisible export. That is also trade. Okay, make sure you're writing these things down, you're marking them in, the accuracy that you need to have for these questions. The other one then is, another argument in favour of engaging in trade is, when you start to mass produce, you start to benefit from economies of scale. So when companies engage in trade, they start to produce more because they're selling more all over the world. When they're producing more, economies of scale kick in, and that enables them to lower their production costs, their average production costs. And again, that's going to make them more competitive on price. So make sure you're marking that in there. As the volume production increases, the cost per unit decreases, makes them much more cost competitive, okay? Remember again, always when you're explaining economies of scale, you can always just say discounts for bulk buying. And that's a simple thing to always remember. And then again, a very good example there, guys, is Jameson. They export their whiskey all over the world, and they benefit from economies of scale there. Another thing, two simple things to remember is just conversing with other countries is a lot easier because you speak English. English is the international language of business, so that's another advantage we have when engaging in trade. And then the last thing then is we've got very educated workers, okay? So we've educated workers in areas, if you want to write beside that there, in stuff like research and development, in science, okay? Do not write that a lot of Irish people go to college, okay? That's not what they're looking for. They're saying like we've got a highly educated workforce that are very innovative, that are young, that are dynamic, and it's in areas like research and development, technology, sciences. So that's another advantage we have when engaging in trade. If you even want to keep it simpler, just circle back to the E's. The arguments in favour of trade, economies of scale, we speak English, educated workers. That's all we have there. Brilliant. Now we'll go over to the drawbacks of engaging in international trade. And again, I tried to circle back to peace. So they're asking you for the argument in favour, the arguments against. Keep it back onto peace, and that'll help you with that. First thing then is payment problems, especially if it's from outside the EU. Collecting payments from companies, if they don't pay you, is going to be very difficult. It's not like if somebody in Ireland doesn't pay you, take them to court. If there's someone in the United States or in Nigeria or something, they don't pay you, you're going to have it's much more difficult to get that money back off them, right? The other issue then is so remember again, peace. So the first thing there is payment. The I then is we're an island nation, so distribution is going to be a lot more difficult. Also, guys, remember we're on the edge of Europe, so that's going to be much more difficult if we're trying to export into the centre of Europe. We're an island nation, so we're reliant on the weather when we're sending goods abroad, okay? So that's another problem. Next one then is English isn't, so PIE, so payment problems, in the island nation, the E there is going to be English isn't spoken in every country. So remember again, you will have to change your websites and all that sort of stuff to account for that. Now the only little warning I'd have for you on that is if they say what are the advantages and disadvantages for a country for Irish business engaging in trade, and you say on one side we speak English and you say on the other side English isn't spoken in every country, they will not accept that as two different points. They'll mark you down for repetition. So just keep that in mind when you're answering that, okay? I know I've put both in, but like just factor that in yourselves. On the day of the exam, they'll pull you down there. Then also, guys, just competition from low-wage economies. Let's see, again, especially Eastern Europe, countries inside the EU, very hard for us to compete with them, with agricultural products. And then the other one there, guys, is exchange rate fluctuations. And always simply remember that there is that when the value of the euro rises, this is bad news for Irish exporters. So you've got the simple thing there. Let's look at this example here in the United States, right? Imagine if €1 gets you $1.01, okay? So there's for the sake of this, let's assume there are no bank charges or anything like this, right? Now, this was what happens if the euro increased in value. So if the euro increased in value, €1 can now buy more dollar. So let's say €1 could buy $1.01, but next year the euro is stronger and €1 can buy $1.20, all right? So that now the euro has gotten stronger. It has increased in value. The value of the euro has risen. It can buy more of another currency. But the problem is, whilst the euro can buy more dollar now, the dollar now can buy less euro. So if it's an American and they want to buy an Irish product, they're going to have to give up more dollar to get their hands on a euro. So the old way, let's say in August 2023, an American would have had to spend $1.01 to get a euro. Now an American person has to spend $1.20 to get €1. So now that table that was being sold for 100 quid, it was $101, now it is $120. So the Irish exports in the US are now more expensive. And that's what they want you to be able to note, okay? So just make sure you've got that marked in there. That's very, very important. Okay, so the euro rises. That is bad news for Irish exporters as their products become more expensive in non-euro countries. Don't say abroad, make sure you say non-euro countries. Brilliant. The last little thing then to note there is, actually we'll take a little pause there and we'll push on with this in the next half because there's a couple of questions I want us to run through. So we'll break this into 3 different parts. Okay, that's great, thanks.